friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences, where we are changing the culture one conversation at a time. We are the radio show and podcast of the Catholic Association. We address the issues that interest you, puzzle you, inflame you, in the hope that we can bring some clarity, even to the darkest corners. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, or you can catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on SiriusXM Channel 130. Of course, our radio show is always a podcast. Go to thecatholicassociation.org/podcasts or directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts. Hello, friends, and welcome to Conversations with Consequences. We are so happy to have our listeners with us. Thank you to our loyal listeners. Thank you for sharing our radio show and our podcast with your friends and family. We hope that the conversations that we have here with our very many splendid guests will spark great consequences in your mind, in your heart, in your spirit, and also in your conversations with your families and with your friends. You can listen to Conversations with Consequences on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network, Saturday mornings at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, or catch the encore at 5 p.m. We are also on SiriusXM Channel 130. Of course, our radio show is always a podcast. You can go to thecatholicassociation.org/podcasts, or just go directly to wherever you listen to your podcasts and put in Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, and today we have a great show for you, as we do every week. At the bottom of the hour, I'll be speaking to my TCA colleagues and friends, Ashley McGuire and Leigh Snead, who will be my co-hostesses. We'll be talking about Walking with Moms in Need, which is a great effort, a new effort by the USCCB that we featured on the show before. We had Archbishop Naumann to talk about it, who is spearheading this effort. It's a way of getting all of the parishes and archdioceses in the U.S. on one page when it comes to creating that welcoming society for children, so that abortion is not even considered, or if it's considered, it's quickly set aside as a consideration, because it was so much better to be welcoming and loving to children. For that, we will have Kristina Arriaga to talk with us. Kristina Arriaga is the former vice chair of the United States Council for International Religious Freedom. We want to get her ideas about China, now that the Olympics are going on, but also other places of interest around the world. Welcome to the show, Kristina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Kristina, you're the former vice chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, and you have such a good understanding of, all the concepts of religious freedom and the way they play out over the globe, and the way that we all should interact with ideas of religious freedom and as Americans, as people who really value religious freedom, and in the way that we relate to other countries officially and also sort of in a personal, non-official way. So all of that to come around to ask you to talk about the Olympic Games playing out in China. What has caught your attention, looking at it through the religious freedom lens, the engagement of the world with China?
And what has caught my attention, and I think the attention of the world, is that China has tried to sports wash its abuses against religious people in China by trying to distract the world from what's going on with the religious communities there. As you well know, it's estimated there are 2 million Uyghurs in concentration camps in China. The Uyghurs are a ethnic group that practices a version of Islam, and they have been relentlessly and mercilessly tortured, sent to re-education camps. The women have been subjected to mandatory and invasive birth control and sexual abuse as well. And the United States has called this what it is, which is a genocide. The fact that the entire world is looking at, for instance, drug issues associated with athletes, as they should, but has turned a blind eye to what's going on with these communities, is embarrassing and shameful. Same thing with the Christian communities in China. They have been suppressed. They have been silenced. Many pastors have been abducted. Many churches have been destroyed. Many congregations no longer have a leader because they have been arrested. And again, the world has turned a blind eye. I mean, they're happy to watch television and see the beautiful skaters. But frankly, we should not have, the United States as the beacon of hope and holding the gold standard of religious freedom should not have participated in this Olympics and should have demanded that the Olympics either be canceled or take place elsewhere.
And Kristina, what, in your estimation, what is the reason that the United States just chose not to engage in that sense with China? Because it's quite something to say, as an official proclamation, to say China is in the midst of a genocide. I mean, that's a tremendous word. It implies so much suffering, so much torture. And at the same time say, okay, we'll send our delegation over there and we'll play sports with you. Why do you think this happened?
Well, unfortunately, the Department of State's foreign policy has artificially divorced human rights issues from foreign policy. And the same thing has happened with many industries in the United States. We're losing our conscience. We're losing our moral compass. And unfortunately, the sports industry thinks that they can separate themselves from human suffering by ignoring it. And it's really a travesty. And we had the chance of taking a tremendous stand against China to support religious communities in China, and unfortunately, we missed the boat and instead decided to participate in the Olympics.
Kristina, there's kind of a sense that we're all being gaslit. I was recently reading an article about Eileen Gu, who, it's actually unclear. She's competing in the Olympics. She's won a gold. She was born in the United States, is, I think, a U.S. citizen, but is competing for China. And when she's asked by reporters just sort of point-blank questions about where is she a citizen, she gaslights everybody and goes off about her haters, quote unquote. And it sort of feels like a little microcosmic example of what's going on with the Olympics in total. That people are asking real questions like, why are we participating in this? Why is this happening? And we're either getting total silence from the press or just being sort of gaslit. And I think, to what extent do you think the press is complicit in all of this?
Yeah, the old idea of a press that's objective and is reporting only is no longer a reality around the world and in the United States. Unfortunately, the reporters bring in their bias into situations, and they're not asking incisive questions because we know what happens, right? The reporter will get canceled or will get in trouble or will be accused of taking one side or the other. And those courageous reporters that have changed people's lives by their reporting are far and few in between. But I also don't want to sound pessimistic or negative. We should not have participated in the Olympics. It's true that reporters ask more incisive questions. But I also think that this pandemic has brought the entire world to its knees, and in terms of accepting the fact that we're mortal human beings and that life is short and fragile. And I'm hoping that our children, having experienced this, will begin to realize that what's really important about life is to live a life well lived. And I see examples all over the world of extreme courage and people resigning their positions to serve others and people redirecting their energy to improve the world. And we've hit rock bottom with the Olympics, but I also think that there's going to be a lot of inquiries about why we're doing this. Why have we lost our moral compass? What is life really about?
One of the beautiful examples that we've seen coming out of China is Jimmy Lai, who was the owner and founder of Apple Daily, which is one of is the last independent newspaper in Hong Kong, or independent journalistic effort in Hong Kong. He elected to stay in Hong Kong and then accept a false imprisonment for his views. I'm in awe of someone like that, a billionaire who could have jumped on a jet and gone to Tahiti to spend the rest of his well-earned retirement. What do you think about Jimmy Lai, Kristina?
Oh, the story of Jimmy Lai and his entire family is astounding and inspiring. He was only 8 years old when he began to notice that there were other ways to be informed and to reach the public. And he's a self-made man. He's a devout Catholic. He lives his principles, and he knew that by sacrificing possibly the rest of his life in prison, he would be highlighting what is going on and what the Chinese government is doing. It's tragic, and we should certainly pray for him to continue to be strong. But you're right, the example of this man who has essentially given up his life and his freedom and his wealth and contact with his family is something that we should remember in our everyday life. Whenever things get a little hard in our first world countries, I think it's important to remember that people like Jimmy Lai are paying for our freedom with their own sacrifice.
Kristina, for our listeners, could you explain a little bit more about why are the Uyghurs a threat to the Chinese government, and sort of likewise, why are Christians being persecuted? You know, a lot of our listeners, most of our listeners are Catholic, and there's a similar sense, that Catholics aren't being put in concentration camps, but there's certainly a lot of oppression going on and a sort of underground. They've been forced underground, and why is that? What is it about these different minority groups that are such a threat to China?
The current regime in China started a process of making the Chinese more Chinese. And what they started to demand was blind obedience from the regime. And nothing is more dangerous to an autocratic regime, to a dictator, than having people who have their own conscience, who know that they're born with certain rights, and that one of them is the ability to live according to their deeply held religious convictions. So the way that the Chinese government started to handle it was to, for instance, put photographs of their leaders right next to a crucifix in a Catholic church and demanding that homilies be censored. And then the process of becoming, quote unquote, more Chinese included taking down religious buildings and taking down communities that understand that their own moral compass, that their insight doesn't belong to the state, that the state does not give them rights, and so the state cannot take them away. And the Chinese have an enormous machinery of surveillance. They have facial recognition technology. They have a credit system where your cell phones are being tracked. They know exactly who you are. They know who you're talking to. They know if you leave your house on Sunday to go to church. They know which door you take out. And that credit system amounts to being able to purchase things and being able to get jobs in the government. So the entire apparatus is geared towards beating people into submission. And we know that people understand that religious people have a different compass than the one the state gives them. And that is very dangerous to the Chinese.
Kristina, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but I've been curious. Is I know about the Chinese social credit system, more or less. I know the broad strokes of it. Do you think belonging to a Catholic church or an evangelical home, a Christian group, or does that detract from somebody's social credit?
Oh, absolutely. The government officials oftentimes stand outside of large congregations, taking essentially attendance records, seeing who's going in, who's coming out, and those people become marked. So even if you have underground churches where individuals are not publicly attending a church for fear of being ticked off as religious people, then those people's phones are tracked. And if they go into a home of a person who needs ministry, that person also falls into the same category as a religious person. Anyone in China who is in any way openly religious is risking becoming a martyr immediately, and is risking their children having arrested, and is risking losing their job, and is risking being sent out to a work camp. And a work camp is a nice way of calling essentially a killing field. It's a place where you're not likely to come out.
If you're just joining us, you're listening to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, alongside my TCA colleague and co-hostess, Ashley McGuire, and we're talking to Kristina Arriaga. She's the former vice chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Kristina, you and I are both Cuban American, and we're people that really feel the pain of the Cuban people, which in many ways is similar to the pain of the people in China, and on a more tropical and with a more tropical environment, and maybe some more looseness because of the way Cuba handles itself. It doesn't handle itself like China exactly, but many of the same ideas of how to control a populace and why religion is such a threat are also happening in Cuba. Tell us about how you see Cuba right now. We all heard a lot about Cuba recently when there were a lot of protests on the streets, the Patria y Vida protests, Homeland and Life, but we don't hear very much anymore.
Yeah, Cuba is at an inflection point. What happened in July continues to happen. We just don't hear about it. Just last week, I was speaking to a Catholic priest from Camagüey, Father Alberto, who told me that the youth in Cuba, particularly the Catholic youth, are seeing an opportunity to continue to press for reform in Cuba. As you know, in July, there were a lot of people that took to the street. Right now, what the Cuban government is doing, it's a very sophisticated campaign against religious people. So first of all, children under 16 who participated in those demonstrations are being sentenced to 10, 15, 20 years in prison.
Oh, my Lord.
To set an example for families who have children at that age, and for anyone who dares to stand up to the regime. The second thing that's happening is that Cuba's alliance with Nicaragua has made it so very recently, just a few weeks ago, Nicaragua removed the demand or the requirement that Cubans get a visa. So the word spread immediately that for about $8,000 average per person, you could fly to Nicaragua and then get someone to immediately take you to the border of the United States and cross through. What's happening now? People are writing relatives in the United States, borrowing the money, arriving into the border where they're let in, and arriving already in debt. But what's also happening is that Cuba is sending to the border agents of Fidel Castro. The spy regime, the spies for the regime are among the most sophisticated in the world. I remember Senator John McCain, who was a POW in Vietnam, telling me that his best torturer had been trained by the Cubans, and that continues to be the case. And what that is doing for churches like the Church of Father Alberto in Camagüey, he has a population of people who are Catholic and want to stay in the island, but if they get the chance of the money, they're going to go to Nicaragua and try to get to the border, to get to the relatives in the United States. The families that are devout Catholic don't want their children to get involved in any anti-government activity. And just last month, Father Alberto, in front of his church, had a quote-unquote acto de repudio, which is an engineered demonstration by government officials against him. Why? Father Alberto's not afraid. He's willing to die for his country. But people that walk in and out of church know that they're government demonstrators, also taking down their names and also seeing who goes in and out of the church. But Father Alberto tells me that things have hit a tipping point, and just like I think there's great hope for the Cuban people that they will continue to press on and take to the streets, and they will want to, after 63 years of having a dictatorship and not having elections, they want their freedom. They want to be able to worship according to their deeply held religious convictions. They want to be able to participate in a process. And again, even though the repression is tremendous, I'm very hopeful that we will see changes in short order.
Kristina, your mentioning of the sort of government rent-a-protesters just sort of validates this sense, I think, that so many people have of you don't know what, it's sort of the new tactic of these regimes, and it's, not just in Cuba. It seems to be everywhere. There's even been stories of some of these protesters being hired or, in the United States to protest things here. And it just adds another layer to, I think, confusion for people as to what's true and what's not. Going back to Cuba, though, I was wondering, there's been so much back and forth between different administrations in terms of what's the best approach that the United States can take in terms of diplomacy. As a Cuban American yourself, what is this administration doing or not doing, and what is sort of the single most urgent action needed now from our government to help the people of Cuba, in your opinion?
The Biden administration has not denounced what is going on in Cuba, even though it has engaged in denouncing several other regimes. Everything that's happening in Latin America right now, in Venezuela, where you have a dictatorship, in Libya, where you have a dictatorship, in Nicaragua, where Catholic priests are getting arrested and in prison, and the opposition candidates are being sentenced to tens of years in prison. Everything that is going on right now is a tumor that started in Cuba and needs to be addressed in Cuba. What people may not know is that when never dollars go to Cuba or tourists go to Cuba, the Cuban people do not benefit from that commerce or that trade or that assistance. In fact, in the Cuban constitution right now, the penal code is trying to criminalize the receiving any money from the United States. So for instance, what is the life of a dentist in Cuba? A dentist who was trained goes into his or her office every day. She doesn't have access to gloves. She doesn't have anything to repair people's teeth. She makes $20 to $40 a month. And to go to the dollar store and get goods, for instance, a gallon of orange juice is $15. So that is almost the wages for the entire month. So what we need to do is side with the Cuban people against the Cuban government, instead of establishing a commercial relationship with Cuba that only benefits a corrupt government.
But a lot of people believe the Cuban government propaganda that the embargo is hurting Cuban people. And it always seems amazing to me, because I understand that the Cuban government can trade with the entire world. Not with the U.S. officially, but the whole world's open to them. And yet, as you say, in Cuba, to get a gallon of orange juice, you have to spend half a month's wages. So why can't people see that very easy to see truth? Kristina, why do you think?
The PR machinery in Cuba is one of the best in the world. And regrettably, a lot of countries channel their hatred towards the United States by also promoting that vision of Cuba as a revolutionary country that stood up to the United States.
Kristina, going back to this administration, there was headlines not too long ago that the State Department took the country of Nigeria off of a list of religious freedom aggressors, which was pretty shocking to people. Correct me if I'm wrong about that news, but in my mind, I think of Nigeria as being one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a Christian. And, the headlines are always telling horrible stories about extremely bloody and violent attacks on people, even in the sacred, walls of a church. Should we be concerned about that? And why do you think they were taken off the list? And what are some other areas of concern in the world that you think are not being taken seriously in terms of religious freedom violations?
Yes, regrettably, Nigeria was taken off the list of a country of particular concern. What does that mean? When I was in Nigeria, I saw the repression against Christians in Nigeria. Nigeria is home to one of the most dangerous terrorist groups in the world. And that terrorist group continues to grow because the Nigerian civil society, the Nigerian government is not equipped to deal with these terrorist groups. It's a place of astounding poverty and one of the few places where the churches are one of the few places where Christian populations can find a place for assistance. I spoke to a man, for instance, whose brother had been killed in a fight between Muslims nomadic groups that come from northern Nigeria to southern Nigeria. And when I asked him when did he file the report, he said, why file the report? I know the police are not going to do anything. So what happens when a country is designated by the Department of State as a CPC, as a country of particular concern, what it means is that Nigerian government officials who may be corrupt or not dealing with their problems at home cannot, as they often do, send their kids to American schools, cannot travel to the United States to go Christmas shopping with the money they have stolen from the people. Why is the Department of State removing countries from the list where they can be sanctioned and these people can be held accountable for what they're doing? Is because the Department of State seems to think that when it goes into a country, its role is to serve that country or serve the commercial interests of the United States alone or the political interests of the United States alone. But that is short-sighted. And for many years, under many other administrations, the Department of State, our diplomats, would negotiate both commercial ventures, but would also advocate for the rights of the individuals who are being oppressed in that country. For instance, in the era of Russia and the Cold War, the Department of State advocated for the rights of Jews who were in Russia, and many of them were able to leave what was at the time called the Soviet Union and save their families. The United States in the past has advocated for the rights of American pastors in Turkey, for instance, like the case of Andrew Brunson. But this administration seems to think that for some reason, it cannot do both things. And that's a betrayal to people all over the world, and it's a betrayal of our values as Americans.
Kristina, I'm sorry to say that we're out of time. I love talking to you. We love talking to you and hearing a real overarching view of our relationship as Americans with all these different challenges to personal freedom and religious freedom across the world. So thank you very much for all you do and especially for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back to Conversations with Consequences. I'm your hostess, Dr. Grazie Christie, alongside my TCA colleagues, Ashley McGuire and Leigh Snead as co-hostesses. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thanks. Hi, great to be with you.
There's so much going on to talk about. One thing that we thought would be very interesting to bring to our listeners' attention is a wonderful effort that we've talked about on the show before out of the USCCB, the United States Council of Bishops, called Walking with Moms in Need. And it's a really great effort. It has to do. It's a top-down effort in order to engage every single parish and archdiocese in the United States in a real comprehensive effort to meet the needs of young families, of single women who are expecting children and need assistance. Because as Catholics, we feel very strongly that abortion is a terrible evil, that children should not be eliminated for being unwanted or inconvenient. But at the same time, we have to be very present in order to make the world a more welcoming place for children.
Yeah, and I think, with everyone's eyes on the Supreme Court right now and knowing that potentially in the next, 5 to 6 months, we could see a major shift in abortion laws. And, just looking at the case of Texas as a small example of a place that's already really done that, basically after 6 weeks in Texas, you can't get an abortion. And, that law has been in effect for so long that many are pointing out that in just a few months, the babies that have been saved by that law are going to start being born. And it highlights sort of the on-the-ground reality of what is going to be needed in a post-Roe world, and the fact that this topic has been so abstract for so long, and it's about to get really real because, let us hope, and so it's exciting to see this sort of groundswell and grassroots efforts popping up all around the country, and especially many of them led by Catholic parishes to start stand at the ready to meet the real needs of moms who've made the courageous choice for life.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are asking on both sides, are we ready? Are we ready for this post-Roe world? And I think the great thing that this initiative does is spreads that information, because in a lot of senses we are ready. We've been doing the work on the ground for a long time, but a lot of people don't know how to connect with those resources. They don't know where to get free diapers, where to get free formula, where to get, childhood education classes, clothes, assistant, someone to drive them to the doctors. And hopefully, I haven't read the entire 65-page document on Walking with Moms in Need, but I'm hoping that, these resources will be available to school principals and guidance counselors, youth group leaders, and so church staff, so that immediately, as soon as someone comes in, boom, there's a list. Boom, there's a list of, resources. There's a list of volunteers who are willing to drive you there. It's a really incredible and, like you said, comprehensive initiative that I think is more timely is probably the understatement of the year.
Well, one of the ways that many of us here on the call, but also many of our listeners help out is we work at pregnancy resource centers. I read fetal ultrasounds for free as pro bono work, and I love that. I love doing that because one of the prettiest things that these resource centers do is that they have these wonderful ultrasound machines, many of them donated by the Knights of Columbus, because ultrasound machines are very expensive to purchase and also to run, and they put down the transducer on the woman's abdomen, and suddenly something that was this sort of uncomfortable idea, or maybe a scary idea, oh no, a baby on the way, what will I do, turns into the reality of a beating heart, a little person you can actually see, and this is very helpful for moms and dads in order to visualize this beauty that's really there. It's not all about worry and concern and distress. It's about a human being that you're so intimately connected to, and that you can learn to love and embrace with the help of others and with the help of all of us who want to be there for these young families or these young women who are understandably scared. I mean, we live in a scary world, right? We just have been going through the pandemic, and so many people lost their jobs or were unable to work the hours that they need to work. That they had children at home. You know how difficult it's been to have children at home when you're trying to get to work and you have children at home, or you're working from home. You have children. You're trying to get on the computer. You don't have enough Wi-Fi to go around. I mean, life has been very hard and very complicated for some time now in a way that we didn't expect through the pandemic. I hope that I really hope and pray that with these changes in abortion law that might be coming down the pike, and hopefully a lot of states will go for a more conservative, more life-affirming choice for moms and babies, that all of us can find a way to get out there, put our feet on the ground and be there for moms.
I'm on this mom's Facebook group. It's for, it's a big group. It's maybe, 5,000, 7,000 moms. There's some dads too, who are in the DC area. And it was primarily created to be like a resource for, when are the tickets for Zoo Lights going on the website? And, what preschool co-ops have openings? And, I've been amazed to see how many of the moms that come on there are like, I can't buy formula and I'm out because my WIC card is empty. And, it goes to show that there's challenges that parents face, and then there's really challenges that I think many of us can't even understand because we've never been in that situation. And, things like mom saying that their car broke down and they can't get their kid to daycare, and they can't get to work, and they're going to lose their job. And if they do, just these really pressing immediate problems that, are just so challenging. And again, the need is so great. I mean, these are moms who already have kids, and, thinking, looking at that, if you're in a community where you're just, poverty is rampant, looking around and saying, how can I cope with that? And, back when the Supreme Court was considering the case as to the free speech and religious liberty rights of pregnancy resource centers, TCA did an amicus brief in the case where we collected the stories of some of the women who've been served by these centers, and they were just absolutely amazing stories. And there's one that I've never forgotten, which was a woman who they helped her, and to the point to me with these stories was not just that these centers helped the woman to decide to keep her baby. It was that they helped continue to meet her needs and get her on her feet until she was in a place where she felt like she could handle being a mother. But one of the stories that I've been thinking about lately with all the snowstorms we've had around here was this woman who had a baby and ran out of formula in the middle of a snowstorm. And one of the workers from this pregnancy center, drove to I think this woman didn't have a car, drove to the grocery store in the middle of a blizzard. I think it was in Boston, which if any of you have ever been in Boston in a blizzard, that is not something to mess around with, and brought her everything she needed, formula, diapers, in the middle of the storm. And I just feel like that story is kind of like a metaphor for where we are and where we have to be at this current time, which is willing to get in the car and drive through, what have you challenge to meet the immediate physical needs that these mothers and children have, and a lot more of them will have in this potentially post-Roe world.
Yeah, and I think that that's something, because this Walking with Moms in Need is so comprehensive, it does take some time and some planning to get it going in a parish. And because of this immediate physical need they're talking about, Ashley, I think that you can, to do things like we can't all be genius medical radiologists like Dr. Christie, but, we had friends who hosted a 12th night party, and everyone was asked to bring a pack of diapers for our local women's crisis pregnancy center. And I think those are easy ways. Our high schools always have diaper drives and formula drives, and I think that that's something you just go to your big box store and buy a big box and drop it off, and that helps somebody today while you're working, with these other programs too.
And, I recently brought a bunch of donations to our local pregnancy resource center in DC. And I just asked the director when we were bringing the stuff, I said, is there anything you need right now? And she said, we always need formula, and we always need a couple of other things. So I bought 2 things of formula and 2 things of diaper cream, and it was $100. And I was like, this is insane. And I showed my husband, and my husband was like, how can anybody afford this? And I was like, I don't know. So it's, especially with inflation, and then there's these shortages of formula.
That's unbelievable. $100.
Yeah. Just 2 things of Similac Pro and 2 things, they were large things of Desitin, good quality diaper cream, was about $100. And I was just shocked.
One of the things that Walking with Moms in Needs does is it puts it makes an effort to put everything together, all the different kinds of efforts that we make to help welcome children into the world, and keep them ticking, not just that moment when they first come in. But it's not just diapers and Desitin and formula, which are so important, so expensive, and now with inflation more. But it's even things like helping, which I know we do in all these pregnancy centers, we do at parishes. We help families stay together, with relationship coaching, relationship coaching, family coaching, professional advice, like professional advancement, how, jobs training. There's so many different elements, because it's not just about getting the child to take that first breath, which is so important, but it's also about forming families that can help, that can support a child, through 18, and do that in a way that's not, a crazy crisis day after day. And a lot of that is very simple things that many of us take for granted, like having the right training to go and get that first job. That's important stuff. Leigh, and I know another issue that's important to Leigh and I is adoption. Adoption is another way that we can help moms in need, because knowing that the option exists to find a really great family for your child that you want to bring to the world, but that you can't care for, is also a very beautiful thing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that's another thing that, parishes need those resources to point women in the right direction, to get them going, to let them understand that they have some say. Their baby isn't going to be taken from them. They're going to, be able to have some choice in this big parenting decision.
Yeah, because I know for you, Leigh, for you, adoption was an open adoption. You were able to find an agency and have this beautiful experience where you were present at the birth. And, maybe a woman who is pregnant and doesn't feel she can, raise a baby, doesn't even know these options exist, that she could have this beautiful connection with the family that's raising her baby. What a lovely thing, no?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that some people, they're afraid that their babies will automatically go into the care system or to an orphanage, like you see in a movie. And I spent like 4 beautiful days in the hospital with my twins' birth mother, and we really got to know each other. And I'll never forget the moment when she grabbed my arm just as I was probably just picking something up and just said, "I'm so glad I chose you." And it was such a vote of confidence that you could just tell that she was happy with the decision too, and knew that I would keep my promises and keeping up with her and letting her know how the kids were doing and everything. It was really a very special time.
Ashley, I'm wondering what you think. And in some of these states, if Roe does actually fall in June or May or whenever, in some of these states, they're going to institute a very hardcore abortion liberalization policy, right? Like practically you can abort right up until the moment you take the baby home from the hospital. Which I shouldn't laugh about, but sometimes you see these abortion laws being promulgated in Vermont and other states like that. They want to write it into the Constitution. Like they're super ultra liberal, right? Abortion to 40 weeks. How do you think that in those states like that, walking with moms in need and other programs like that can be helpful?
Well, I think first of all, it's worth noting that those states are, few and far between. And I think, as states hopefully are given the right to actually reflect their voters, what voters want to see when it comes to protecting women and babies and abortion legislation, that those sort of extreme laws are going to be very few. And I think sort of stigmatize, I think, the extremism. I mean, right now, because the people have no say in the issue, and our laws are forced on us from the top down, we don't really have that stigma. But my hope is that we'll sort of stigmatize the grotesque barbarity of those sort of extreme laws. But all that being said, I think those sorts of programs are going to be maybe needed more there than anywhere else, because I think states that have laws like that, they empower perps and gross, shady guys who can take advantage of the fact that they can abuse a woman and then drag her at 6-7 months to an abortion clinic. And, a woman who feels like she doesn't have any choice. I think those sorts of programs are going to be needed more maybe there than anywhere else, because you're going to have women, I genuinely believe that, in a post-Roe world, there is going to be more acceptance and sort of celebration of life, acceptance of and positive views of women who've made this choice. So that's my view. I think those sorts of programs are going to be needed everywhere, and maybe in the places with the most extreme laws the most.
I think that's right. And I think especially if a woman puts off making a choice, which is a choice in itself, and then she finds herself to later stages in pregnancy, even if she knows vaguely that maybe it's still legal, the evidence of the life growing within her is going to be so clearly obvious that hopefully if she puts it off that long, she'll make the loving choice and work with this outreach arm and get the support she needs to love her baby.
Ladies, it's hard to believe, but we're at the end of our time. Ashley, what do you like to leave us with? You have 45 seconds.
this week we're celebrating Valentine's, and so what better time to show the love and to maybe make a donation to your local pregnancy resource center or program like Walking with Moms in Need.
I think that's a great idea, Ashley. I also think it's a great time to, celebrate the joy of your own marriage, to let people know that marriage is actually pretty great and not anything needs to be put off or afraid of, and it's creating the basis for that family that can support that child through those 18 years.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you. Bye.
Every morning, the Catholic Association reviews all the latest news and sends our subscribers a carefully curated collection of the most important news of the day. Items are specifically selected for a smart Catholic audience like you. Don't let the world take you by surprise. Subscribe to our daily media roundup at thecatholicAssociation.org. And now, Father Roger Landry offers us, as is customary, a short and inspiring homily to prepare us for this Sunday's Gospel.
This is Father Roger Landry, and it's a privilege for me to be with you as we enter into the consequential conversation Jesus wants to have with us in this Sunday's Gospel, when he will speak to us about the most revolutionary and challenging part of all his teaching, what distinguishes Christianity from every other religion and moral philosophy, his command to love even our enemies. Jesus calls us to do far more than merely tolerate those who oppose us or not be subsumed with a spirit of revenge toward them. Calls us to love them, to do good to them when they hate us, to bless them when they curse us, to pray for them when they mistreat us, to turn the other cheek when they slap us first, to give our undergarments to those who take our coats, and ultimately to be willing even to die for them. Doing so, Jesus is trying to help us to learn how to be like him, to love others as he has loved us first, to act in accordance with his image and likeness in which we were created. He tells us that if we do so, we will be children of the Most High, for he himself is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. We will become merciful just as our Father is merciful. If we live by this standard, if we measure out in this way, he promises, gifts will be given to us, a good measure packed down, shaken together, and overflowing will be poured into our lap. Not necessarily, of course, by the persecutors, but by God himself. We learn from Jesus how to live this gospel. He loves those who don't love him, and even those who have made themselves his enemies through sin. He blesses those who curse him and blaspheme against him. He gives and gives and gives, and forgives and forgives. We see this gospel put into practice in all its clarity on Good Friday, as Jesus prayed to the Father to forgive his executioners, those who were mocking him, and all those whose sins were bringing about his expiatory death. For they know not what they are doing, he told the Father. When the soldiers of the high priest or of the Roman guards slapped him on one cheek, Jesus could have easily annihilated them by his divine power, but he didn't fight back because he loved those who were harming him and didn't want to harm them back. When they stripped him of his cloak, he allowed them to strip him of his tunic as well. When they bid him to walk on the road to Calvary, he walked a second mile. In all of this, Jesus is telling us, come follow me. He wants us to be distinguished from all the rest by the way we as Christians love everyone like he does, including those who don't love us. He tells us, for if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. If you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do the same. When he tells us, do to others as you would have them do to you, he is ultimately saying, love others with the same forgiving love with which you would want to be loved by others. In all of this, Jesus is calling us to live by his standard. The standard of most in the world is reciprocity. We generally try to treat well those who treat us well. If others treat us poorly, we feel justified in doing the same to them. But as the old adage goes, living by the principle of an eye for an eye just leaves the whole world blind. Christ calls us to look on others with the eyes of God the Father, who is kind to the ungrateful and the wicked. Jesus tells us that if we love only those who love us, if we do good only to those who are good to us, if we give only to those who give to us, then we're no different from everyone else whom Jesus clearly calls sinners. The human notion of justice, of quid pro quo, is not enough. Jesus calls Christians to a much higher standard, the standard of God the Father, to be merciful as our Heavenly Father is merciful, even and especially when others don't deserve it. This is what love really is, doing what's best for the other at all times, even when the other does not reciprocate it, or appreciate it, or even acknowledge it. But Jesus doesn't stop merely by calling us to live up to the standard he himself lived and told us to follow. He then says something absolutely breathtaking, that we, for our part, set the standard by which we want God to treat us. The measure with which you measure, Jesus declares, will be measured back to you. If we're merciful to others, God will be merciful to us. If we forgive, we'll be forgiven. If we're generous with others, God will be generous to us and bless us abundantly with good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, poured into our lap. Jesus says that there will be a correspondence between our actions and God's, for good or for bad. For if you forgive others their trespasses, he says in St. Matthew's Gospel, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses. The Father will treat us by the standard we adopt. If we wish to be forgiven by him, we must forgive others. If we wish not to be condemned by him, then we must not condemn others. If we wish to be loved by him, even when we sin against him, then we must love others even when they sin against us. God loves us with an unconditional love and calls us to love others with unconditional love. If we choose, however, to love others conditionally, to do good only to those who are first good to us, to forgive only some, to condemn those we think deserve it, to retaliate when someone harms us, then Jesus tells us that that is the measure we will receive. This truth is not an exception to God's unconditional love for us. He still loves us even when we're ungrateful and wicked and never wishes to condemn us. Rather, it's we who refuse to allow his unconditional, merciful love to live in us and grow. Our failure to love others impacts our receptivity to God's love. The only way for us to receive the full measure of God's unconditional love, to have our laps filled to overflowing with his graces, is by opening ourselves up to receive them by loving others unconditionally. The only way we can experience those blessings is by following Christ along the narrow, uphill, challenging path of real, self-giving love. Christ calls us to live by his standard of love precisely, so that in doing so we will be able to receive from the Father in return the full measure of his love. Let's finish by making 3 clarifications. First, the word Jesus uses for love and love your enemies is agape, not philia, the love we have for friends, or eros, the love between a husband or wife. Agape means unconquerable benevolence, that no matter what others do to us, we keep loving. We don't descend by vengeance to their level of hatred, but seek to unite the experience to God and to respond with and like God. Jesus is not calling us, notice, to like our enemies, or to hang with them, or to have warm, fuzzy feelings about them. But he is calling us never to stop wishing them well, never to stop doing them good, never to stop praying for them in their conversion, never to stop asking God to forgive them. Second, part of unconquerable benevolence toward even our enemies involves trying to stop them from whatever evil they're doing. We don't love someone if we enable him or her to continue to behave in a way that does harm to others and immeasurably damages their soul. We don't love an alcoholic by buying him a bottle of bourbon. We don't love terrorists by permitting them to continue to commit atrocities. We intervene, we stop them, but we do so out of love, not vengeance. The third clarification builds on the first 2. Loving enemies doesn't entail loving them to the exclusion of loving others, like our family members, friends, and fellow citizens. We have to protect those entrusted to us. It would be a failure of love of neighbor not to defend them as good shepherds. The principle of legitimate self-defense and the principles underlying the doctrine of just war are based on this twofold protection. Love of neighbor doesn't mean allowing armed robbers to attack our family members or terrorists to take the lives of innocent victims, because that would show a failure to love both those intending to do harm as well as their intended victims. The place where we learn how to love our enemies and put on God's love is the Mass, where we enter into Jesus' own prayer of mercy. The Mass is the good measure packed down, shaken together, and overflowing, poured into our lap that Jesus promises. And it gives us the standard by which to measure out our love to others. It's where we're strengthened to turn the other cheek, to go the second mile, and to love by Christ's measure. It's where Christ from the inside helps us to live and love by his standard. On Sunday, let's ask for that grace. God bless you all.
Thank you, Father Landry. To hear more from Father Landry, check out his website at catholicpreaching.com, and you can also catch his writings at EWTN's own National Catholic Register. A big thank you to all our listeners for joining us. I hope that this show was helpful. I hope that it gave you more peace and more hope and more joy, and you go with our prayers.